Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I am so happy today to be joined by Tammy, who is the founder of Girls Trip Tours. I said it so many times in my head and I still did it backwards. And we connected because I was just sharing with her. I am such a fan of her work. I saw it kind of fly past me on LinkedIn and did a little research and have been so inspired to see kind of how some of the ideas that I've had in my mind and that I've been thinking about are really in action. So, Tammy, I'm really excited to talk about your work, how you're bringing together tech and social impact, and what that looks like. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
I would love for you, if you would like to start by just sharing a little bit more about who you are, about Girls Trip Tours, and then we'll go more in depth from there.
Awesome. I'm Nigerian, but I grew up in New York City. So my life has always been about travel, just the way I grew up going back and forth between those different places. I went to college in the States at an all women's college, and that really shaped the way that I moved through the world because I got to spend 4 years in an environment where everything was built for and around me, and that really empowered me. And it let me know that, I mean, everyone already says it's a man's world, but living in just an environment built for women for 4 years showed me how powerful women could be if the world catered more to them. And so I think that is really what planted the seed in terms of how I started to think about working. And so I started Girls Trip Tours right after I closed down my magazine. My magazine was also dedicated to women. And with Girls Trip Tours, I think I had finally started putting the pieces together of what I meant to do is really uplift women. What I meant to do is build products, services, and ecosystems where women thrive. And because I grew up going back and forth between Africa and the diaspora, I kind of fit into both communities, but also not really. And so I saw myself more as a connector of the two communities than necessarily based in either one. And so I created a business based on that identity, based on how much I loved working with women, how much I loved empowering and uplifting other women, and how much I really wanted to connect both Africa and the diaspora.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like there's so many similarities in just maybe kind of our internal call and like our journeys to get there and the way things have been revealed to us slowly. I wonder, you mentioned a little bit about going to women's college and how empowering that was. And as you were talking, I was feeling a lot of envy actually of what that experience. I hadn't really thought about it. I had thought about it would be great to be in a community of women and maybe there would be some different educational opportunities. But when I reflect back to my college education, to have actually been in that type of environment, I was just thinking about all these different possibilities I had never really thought about before, and how powerful it would be to be, having so many smart and innovative women around you constantly just kind of showing you the limitlessness of the potential of women, whereas where I would have maybe one or two professors that would be women, and I would maybe then have one or two TAs, and it just wasn't such a all encompassing and nurturing space. Did you seek that out on purpose, or was that just an opportunity that landed in front of you? Because I feel like if I'd have known that existed, I definitely would have jumped for that. But I wonder what your experience was.
So I also went to an all girls high school. And because of that, I knew I didn't want to go to an all women's college. My sister was the one that was interested in the Seven Sisters, basically. And for us, it was kind of just a financial aid hack, kind of. We were told that, oh, these are the schools that really give good financial aid for international students. And so that's where my sister was focused. And because she's a year older than me, I just kind of did what she did.
Mhm.
Um, and so when I got into Mount Holyoke, I loved it. Um, it did take a bit of adjustment because it was in the middle of nowhere, and I wasn't really appreciating, like, all the things you're saying are 100% true. But at 18, you're not really thinking about that. You're like, I went to an all-girls high school. Where are the boys?
Mhm.
Um, but as I settled in over the first year, I started to make friends from all over the world. I had friends who were writers, friends who were studying rocket science, literally, right? Working, there's a project on campus around the Mars rover, right? You had students, women working on that. And so it did show me the potential, but it wasn't even just like those big things. It was also like the very little things. The fact that the height of the sink was designed for like the average women's height and not men's height. It was like where bathrooms were located. It was just like little things that, there's always a long line, to use the bathroom at a club. Like people always make that joke, but we had a campus where that was never an issue because it was actually a space, designed to solve that problem. And so I found it extremely empowering. I didn't necessarily come into college very confident. I'd lost a bit of confidence in high school because I had a completely different experience with girls in my high school than the women I met at college. Um, yeah, girls were very mean in high school. And so by the time I got to Mount Holyoke, I really needed to rebuild my confidence. And being in that environment surrounded by women that were more interested in collaboration than competition um, really changed how I saw sisterhood and community.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. And I recognize that my 18-year-old self would have probably been a little bit, torn about that part of me that really craved communities of women, even though I didn't know it yet. I think
Mhm.
I would have, appreciated it, but at the same time, it's easier looking back to really witness what was important out of those situations. Another story that I was sharing with you that I was really moved by was how much your grandmother inspired you and showed you how becoming, you know, what it means to really become an empowered woman. And you shared that she really brings to life the adage of when you educate a girl, you educate a nation. And I would love if you would share a bit of her story and how it influenced you. And I think that my listeners will also really appreciate this part of your journey as well.
Yeah, so my grandmother, she grew up in Nigeria under British colonial rule. She was one of the brightest students at her high school, and so she was selected for a Queen's Scholarship. And so she got to do her A levels in the UK, and then she did her undergrad as well as her master's at St. Andrews University in Scotland, which is where Prince William went, as an example. So her just being able to get that education at that time, it meant that when she came back to Nigeria, she was part of that generation that really got to nation build after colonial rule had ended. And most of that generation is dominated by men, right? Many of which are still in power. And so in my life, it was great to have an example of a woman who was part of that. And she actually has a group of friends. There are like 5 of them, and they're all like first mathematician, first dean of a university. Like that was her cohort growing up. So seeing her as well as those women who were able to break glass ceilings was very important in my development. And because education was so important to her, and she saw it as a tool to just for social mobility, she had 6 children, all of them, have degrees, and she ended up becoming a teacher. She was also a diplomat, so she was the first woman to serve at the highest level of the Ministry of Education. She was posted to UNESCO in Paris in the 70s, and she was the highest level Nigerian posted to UNESCO. So she ran that office, and at the time, yeah, you just didn't have women in that role. Actually, my grandfather stayed at home with the kids, and she would go to work. So she's always been inspiring to me, just to see all the things that she did with her life, and that she never let the times dictate what she was able to achieve. And so for me, living in this time where so much more is possible, I haven't been able to make excuses as to why I can't do things, because I have a living example at home of someone who did all the things even without the examples. And so she has inspired how I move in this world, but also how I want to make sure to give back. Because in her career as a teacher and a principal and at the Ministry of Education, she was able to educate thousands of children, and she had her hand in developing the Nigerian education system. And so I want that kind of legacy. And that's why, in addition to Girls Trip Tours, we have a nonprofit, and our whole focus is on giving girls future-proof skills and just on allowing more access to education for girls on the continent so that they can break similar barriers.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I don't know why I feel like I can just feel that sense of like power and I don't know. I can paint a picture of her in my mind. For some reason, I have no reason why I'm like very attached. I feel like I think because also for myself, like my personal mission is telling the stories of women like this whose stories haven't been told and who aren't represented when we open a textbook, or that we have to dig for the stories like this. So I think that's why it really resonates for me. It just feels like, aha, this is the story. This is one of the journeys I should be hearing about, because I think it's really important. And so anyway, I really appreciate that you took the time to share that with us. I also think, like you said, growing up in the US, moving back and forth, and then having this person in your life who is such a mentor, I feel like it really allows you to then begin to see all the different stories that exist between those two spaces. And I wonder how much that influences um, what you have gone on to create. And I'm going to pause just a second because I think either I'm frozen or you are. Can you hear me?
Okay, you're back.
There you are. Okay. um, do you know where you
You were
lost
about to
me?
ask another question.
Okay. It was a cliffhanger. Okay. Let me just pause for a second here so then I'll know when I'm editing. Oh, so when we then look at kind of, where you've come from, these things that have influenced you and the passions that you've had towards community and empowering women, how did that really transition into travel? What did that journey look like for you?
So the transition took a long while because I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years. And I started off in content. I had just graduated from school. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur because most people in my family have taken that path. And so I couldn't see myself like only having a 9 to 5. And so the summer I graduated from university, I started this magazine, and it grew to like having 20 team members all across the world. We had millions of readers coming onto the website. And I think that's where I really got the confidence to be like, okay, I can build something. The magazine wasn't necessarily the right thing for me to build. I think at the time I started it, there wasn't a lot of representation of Africa in global media. And I wanted to be part of like the Africa Rising narrative. I wanted to tell those stories, like you said, that haven't been told, that people don't know about, because I was seeing people do amazing things across the continent and it just wasn't getting coverage. And so I'm really glad we were part of that moment. But the more years I spent working on it, the more I felt like I wanted a more tangible way of connecting Africa with the diaspora, of influencing women and telling women's stories. And so travel just made sense because it was more real. Like instead of just reading online, how about you come? How about I show you around? And so that was the genesis of the idea. Like, let me bring the magazine to life through travel. And that's what we kind of do. Restaurants that I would have written about in the magazine, that's where we dine. People that I would have interviewed, those are our hosts. And so through this medium, I'm able to tell the story of really amazing women building incredible things on the continent. And I'm also able to be a bit closer to my community and bring them into the experience in a real way. And together, the community from the diaspora and the community based on the continent, we work together to uplift the next generation. And I found that the social impact days, our mentoring program, like that is what people find most valuable out of the experience. Because you could travel to Africa on your own, but the narrative I try and tell with our itineraries, you probably won't be able to find those people without coming through our network. And definitely the mentoring and just our approach to mentoring, right? And our approach to philanthropy. As much as possible, we're trying to decolonize it and come as Africans doing philanthropy for other Africans and kind of shift the narrative of who cares about the continent, who invests money in the continent. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I I love that you kind of talked about bringing that to life, because I feel like when I speak about travel, often that's kind of what I'm trying to convey, is there's just something that you can't get without being in a place, and that the way, you might read something that's really moving and sticks with you, but when you've experienced it and when you have heard someone else tell you their story versus, having a writer convey it for you, it like lives within you. It becomes a part of your story in a way that I think it doesn't when you are when you're just reading about something or studying something. And so I think that is really powerful. And I also think, and maybe you can share as well, when it's amongst groups of women and then also connecting with groups of women where you're traveling, that's also the focus of the trips that I create. There
Mhm.
is some like special thing that happens, and it's just such a beautiful thing to participate in and to witness and see that that take shape. So I would love for you to share what that has looked like for you.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's so hard to describe it. It's intangible. It's like magic. And I'm trying to put my finger on it in this moment, but I think just because of the way life is, how fast life moves, just the times we live in, there's just not a lot of opportunity for like true, deep, meaningful connection with other people outside maybe, family members or childhood friends. As an adult, it's really hard to make new friends and build those kind of deep bonds. And I think the trips that we create a space where you can truly in 7 to 9 days get to know other people on such a deep level. Because if you think about it, let's say you meet your friends once a month for brunch, right? Like it's not a lot of time you spend, but in 7 days, just with that same group, having all the meals, having these life changing experiences. There's a connection that is built in such a short time. And I think there's also just the natural commonality of like we can be from different countries, we can be from different ethnic backgrounds, but we all walk through this world as a woman. And so a lot of things don't need to be said, they're just understood. And being in that group, um, it feels safe. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I do. I think there's some part that, even though like in general experiences may be very different culturally, that woman experience is similar in some ways, and I think that's the part that immediately links up both as
Mm.
travelers and as connecting between cultures, that we can really dive into that space really quickly, especially if you kind of curate an environment where that type of connection is available, where people are or are open to it, are leaning into that experience. And I can think of so many times, traveling in different parts of the world and having these conversations. And when I reflect back on them, I can't remember what language they were happening in. I can't remember if there was a translator, but I can really strongly remember that we deeply connected and that we laughed or cried or like took care of a child together or did a task together, and the way it felt just very pure and real. Like I think that transcends so many things and creates a bond that I think is really important, and I think is really the foundation for actually addressing a lot of the social issues. Having kind of that sense of camaraderie and understanding, or a moment in time together, it just shifts, I think, how we want to show up for one another.
100%.
Yeah. Well, we have talked a little bit about this already, but I think in part for me, part of why what you're creating stands out so much is because you are creating and catering towards women of African ancestry that shares a perspective that centers around African women and really like dives into all of the parts of this experience. Why is that so important to you? And why do you think that's so important to your travelers and the communities? You addressed a little bit, showing how women are supporting in philanthropically, that it's other women of African ancestry investing. Like, what is that dynamic and what does that look like? Do you think why that's so important?
Yeah, I think the dynamic is constantly changing because 10 years ago, I don't know if we would attract the same kind of audience we do now. I think because Africa is more center stage, more front of mind for people, whether it's because of the music, entertainment, um, also because of travel. I think 10 years ago, people were not as interested in going to the continent outside of a safari um, than they are now. And so, because that narrative is shifting and more people are visiting the continent, especially Black people with the Black travel movement, Black people coming to Africa, they're starting to see that all the things we've been told, like all the 70s campaigns, you feed a child in Africa with the $1 a day narrative. That's not necessarily the experience that you're going to get. That's part of the experience that might exist in some forms, but just like everywhere in the world, we have a full society, right? America has poverty, Africa has poverty. There's poverty everywhere, there's wealth everywhere, there are bad neighborhoods everywhere, there are good neighborhoods everywhere.
Yeah. Am I losing you again? Tammy, if you can hear me, I'm switching my Wi-Fi. See if that's it. Are you there?
You
Okay. Are
and
you
your picture.
back?
I'm back.
Okay. Or I am. I'm not sure who went where, but okay. I'm so sorry about that.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, so your picture was still frozen up until now. Now it's coming back.
Okay. So I switched my Wi-Fi channels. So
Mhm.
hopefully on my end, it will be better now. I'm so sorry. Um, okay, let's see if I can get us back to where we were in our conversation. Okay. Yeah, so you were talking a little bit about, oh gosh, now you're frozen again, or I am. This is really frustrating. Wait, maybe you're not. Can you see and hear
You
me?
are frozen.
I
You
know.
are frozen. Or
Okay, I'm
just
gonna
slow.
turn my
Or
video
you can.
off.
It's a little pixelated.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Oh, I hate when I can't read body language when I'm talking, but it's okay. I think we should do
Mhm.
this. That way we can at least maybe get through the conversation. Um, okay, so you were sharing a little bit about the different kind of reasons why you think this is the space and time for the type of travel that you're creating because of the travelers that you're attracting. Um,
Yeah.
and did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to kind of land it. So I would say yes. I'm focusing on people of African ancestry, and I think this time is the time to do that. I think Africa's image globally has changed, and people are more aware of the opportunity that exists on the continent, the beauty of the continent. I think previously only one side of Africa has been shown. And the more sides that people see, the more curious they've become about exploring the continent for themselves. And especially for Black women, which like life for women everywhere is hard, but I think especially in the Western world, life for Black women is particularly difficult, whether it's in corporate America or just walking down the street. And so I do see Africa as a place where I feel the most free. And that's not to say there are not issues there, but on the continent, I'm more dealing with misogyny. I'm not dealing with both racism and misogyny at the same time. And so because I have this experience, I just had a hunch that perhaps other Black women felt the same. And through the community I've built, I can say that that is our mutual experience, just that the more people travel Africa, the more free they feel, and they feel like there's a place where they can just exist and they don't have to over explain themselves. And that's what I want to curate for the community. I don't want I don't want to like, because there's this narrative like for Black women, rest is resistance, and like free travel is this revolutionary act. I think while those things are true, we're just like everyone else, and rest is to our existence. It doesn't have to be this act of resistance as well. It can literally just be without having our actions be a part of this like larger political narrative, right? And so with my trips, I just create a space where Black women can exist and not over explain themselves and build community with one another while also uplift the next generation, because we know that they're probably going to go through a lot of the same struggles we've had to go through in terms of unlearning beauty standards or unlearning so many things that society is going to place on them. And so I love working with Gen Z girls because I just think they're on a different wavelength. I think they've realized a lot of the lies of society a lot faster than at least it took my generation. And so it's great to be a part of supporting their development and their pursuit of freedom.
Mhm. Um, Gosh, there's so many things in there that I'm not even sure where to go. One, it just um I mean, I just love that what you've done is so intentional and the way you're thinking about all these aspects and these moments and where the value lies and what those experiences can be or don't, like you said, don't have to be. Like there's just so many possibilities within that. And
Mhm.
also just kind of starting or going back to where you started with this description of the story that has been painted historically, at least in our generations of Africa. And for me, the first time I traveled there, that was kind of the thing that most struck me, and the thing that I felt was also so important in terms of bringing travelers to the continent is that um, you just saw so quickly how one-sided or how narrow that story is. And I was
Mhm.
actually at a conference where I was facilitating, or meant to be facilitating, a conversation. And it was really one of the moments in my life that I was so caught off guard, or so made aware of the the place of privilege that I had been put into, and how I guess it was just the first time where I could feel the complete um, inappropriateness of that message and that story, and how I was just so disheartened that anyone asked me to be a leader in that space, because as soon as I sat down, I felt how I was meant to be there learning and not leading. And
Mhm.
it was so powerful to just hear the wisdom of the community that I happened to get to sit in circle with. And it really just changed everything really about travel for me, because I realized the dynamics that we create when we travel, and the ways that we, even though we're traveling and we're saying we're doing it to connect, that we were still kind of creating the barriers around ourselves, or like moving through in some sort of a bubble. I don't know how to explain it well, but I just, like, after that, I kind of really tried to set aside anything that I had already been told or was assuming, not just in Africa, but in many destinations, and like experience it for myself firsthand. Um, and I don't know. I think that that would be so important, especially in the communities that you're bringing, because it's such a different space of understanding your own ancestry and your own, like, the depth or the background of your own story that you've been told from someone else's perspective, that doesn't have any experience in the storytelling. This is coming out so
Mhm.
unclearly, but like, I just think it's so, so important. And I can imagine, like, maybe the moment that I am trying so poorly to to explain and narrate, when your travelers are maybe having that same moment, how powerful that is for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the moment is powerful, right? And there are many moments where there are these different realizations. But also, I think the way Black people want to travel the continent and the way like European tourists, as an example, travel the continent are very different.
Mhm,
So while I mean, and there are some tourists that go for the people, but by and large, like the narrative is you when you go to Africa, it's more about, the place. Or if you are going for the people, it's like in an act of service, which I
mhm,
think is kind of like what you were talking about in the story, realizing like the power dynamics didn't really make sense
mhm,
in the situation. And I think when Black people go to the continent, it really is to connect. It's really for community, right? To come back home in a certain regard. And one thing I try to do through the itinerary is make sure that the experiences are led by Black women, that the money that we're paying goes towards local vendors. So as much as possible, we try to stay at local hotels or book with local companies because I mean, if you've traveled to the continent, you know yourself a lot of the ecosystem isn't owned by the locals, and it definitely isn't owned by Black women. And so it's been really difficult to build the ecosystem that we've curated, but I'm really happy that we've done it because they exist. They're few and far between, but the ecosystem we have now, there's a fine dining chef. We have Africa's first all-women safari guide team. We've really gone out and looked for women to lead the itinerary so that that also reflects back onto the group. Because the dynamics would be completely different if we were staying, in only foreign owned hotels, or our safari guide was a white man. It does change the dynamic. And you can still have those moments of realization and those like aha moments, but I think it takes it to a new level when you're experiencing that with women who look like you leading the narrative.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think also, looking at creating experiences when we're traveling, that is also something that I really lean towards, is finding locally owned and women owned businesses and organizations to support and collaborate, in co-creating this storytelling experience. Really is how I see travel, right? And this point of connection and also impact. And you mentioned how difficult it is, but I do think if people have set the intention to support women and travel is the vehicle in which they're doing that, that it does exist. Like you said, you might have to dig
Mhm.
a little deeper, but I do think there are pretty much everywhere you go, there is a way that that is possible. And when you're looking at kind of the intersection of tourism and gender equity, how do you see the two supporting one another? Because for me, I feel like this is a space where actually we can create a lot of impact because of the way it does connect people and the way that it can directly support women in communities in countries where we're traveling.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential and it's definitely underexplored. So that's why in order to scale the work that I'm doing, I'm focusing on the ecosystem because while planning the group trips for Black women is great, I know that the vendors that we're bringing on board to be able to sustain them year round, we have to do like many different things. So the group trips is definitely one avenue, but another avenue we just launched is solo trips. So we have a referral system. If you come to us, we have a group of locally owned travel agencies or tour guides that work within our ecosystem and they can host you. And so if you can't afford, thousands of dollars for this like lavish group trip, we can work with your own budget and connect you to local guides to curate the same kind of experience, but for an individual. We just wrapped up a day trip to Zambia, Victoria Falls, for a travel blogger. And so that's where we see white women really fitting into the business model and being able to support is, as you said, it can be really hard to find those women, even though they exist. So we're making it a lot easier to find them and book your own experiences through our platform. And then the third thing I've been exploring is metaverse travel because I have a background in innovation and AI strategy, and I work in tech. I've been thinking more about like sustainability and just different aspects, making a travel experience pandemic proof. And so we'll be launching metaverse travel later in the year, but the idea is you can go in to this virtual reality experience and enter into like 360-degree videos and feel like you're in a place, walk through a storyline, take a look at virtual tours, but instead of it just being a video, you're kind of immersed in that reality. So I think there's so much opportunity, and with everything we're doing, we're really focused on supporting women-owned businesses who are doing the work on the continent, and just making sure that the value of women's work in tourism is lifted up because as you know, if you've traveled to the continent, a lot of the people you'll probably work with are women, right? You have women who own restaurants. You're going to interact with them. They're going to try and sell you their wares and things like that. But in the thousands of dollars you take to the continent to spend on different things as you're traveling, the art piece you buy in the market isn't where most of your money is going to, right? The local restaurant you go to, that's not a lot of money. Where the money really is in the experiences that you pay for, in the hotels that you stay at. And so we're trying to kind of move women-owned businesses up the value chain so that they're able to earn more of the tourism dollars that come into the economy.
Yeah. Thank you. That I feel like that's such a an important point to make because I agree. Like the experiences and the interactions and the exchanges, monetary exchanges definitely do tend to occur at the lower dollar point. And trying to think about ways where women can be a part of the greater value parts of the ecosystem of tourism, I think is really really important and valuable. Um, I know that you mentioned briefly your the foundation that you have started in connection with your travel. Can you share a little bit more about Girls Map Foundation and the work that you're doing there?
So with the foundation, I started that 2 years ago. And from the onset, I knew I wanted to have a social impact mission along with the trips. I knew that if I was bringing people to Africa for potentially the first time, I wanted there to be an exchange. I wanted there to be a true value exchange. It wasn't just us going um, and taking from the locals, like taking from the experience and then going home and not really giving anything back. And so with our first trip to Ghana, I partnered up with a friend who ran a coding academy for girls. And the issue she was having at the time was that the parents didn't understand why their girls were learning to code. They were saying that, now all of a sudden the girls wanted to go to university for computer science, and they just felt like it would make it harder for them to find a match and to find a husband because now they're going to be high maintenance and get all these ideas in their head. And so initially, I just wanted to go and talk to those parents and just explain the opportunities that they were keeping their children away from. I wanted to go and also let the girls know that they were on the right path and show them what was on the other side of that path if they continued down it. And as the universe always aligns, the people that ended up coming on the trip, one worked at eBay, another worked at LinkedIn. We had someone from Ford Foundation. And so it was the exact kind of women that I wanted the girls to see, right? And so from then on, it was just such an amazing experience. It truly was transformative for the women that I brought on the trip, but also for the girls. And so it's something I knew I had to do every time we traveled. And eventually I formed the foundation to kind of hold that work and to be able to, raise funds to make sure that we weren't just dropping in, having these amazing exchanges, and then never seeing those girls again, but that there was something that could hold them between, trips. And so what we do now is every trip funds a girl for 1 school year. So not only do we meet them when we visit and have that be like the kickoff of their experience with the foundation, but then we're able to give them a scholarship and pay for their education. Um, and I just see it as a way to give back to the community that we are enjoying so much from, but also a way to really give people an experience that they can't curate on their own. And so, yeah, the foundation is very much central to how the travel company operates.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for explaining that. And I think, when we travel, I think when many of us travel, there is that moment where you do feel like you would like to support the community where you've traveled, but you aren't really sure how to do that or how to create the most positive impact or to make sure that you're not inadvertently creating a negative impact. And so
Mhm.
I think
Yeah,
bringing those two pieces together for travelers and then having them be able to experience a component of it while they're traveling, that it's not just this standalone checkbox, I think that's
exactly.
also a really important aspect to what you've created. Well, you have also mentioned, your passion for tech and bringing, more women into that space as well. And you have a background in tech and have been beginning to speak about ethical AI. And I think technology and tourism are really becoming intersected in a way that a lot of us didn't expect, or it's just becoming such a strong a part of running your business. So whether you're in tech or not, if you're in travel, it seems as though you are beginning to be in tech. But I would love for you to share, one kind of what your draw there is and how tech and social impact really work together in your life, but then also with the aspect of creating, ethical AI, what does that look like, and how can people kind of learn more about that and bringing that into their businesses?
Yeah, so that has been a big question for me for the past few years because I've been thinking like, how do I scale the impact? How do I use technology to scale the impact? And I think finally landing on the metaverse travel was like an aha moment for me, where it was like, if part of the values of this company is to be responsible, to be sustainable, then metaverse travel, it provides an opportunity for, it's not necessarily like, okay, you're going to travel in the metaverse and like skip real life travel, but it's more of something that helps you decide where you want to go. Um, and something that also will provide an opportunity for our vendors to earn money remotely. So those were the two reasons for the metaverse travel. And in general, I just feel like AI specifically provides opportunities to create efficiency in how things work. I know like planning itineraries can be really difficult. I think there's a huge opportunity for like AI planned itineraries and things like that. I recently actually saw a chat GPT prompt where you can really in great detail have chat GPT throughout some itineraries. The question then becomes, how responsible is that, especially on the continent? Because I have talked to ChatGPT and asked it questions around Africa, and it doesn't have, like, sometimes it just doesn't have the information. And so I think specifically where tech intersects on the continent, because there isn't as much information available. There's some cities you'll go to and like you can't really follow Google Maps. There are actually possibly local alternatives that are more reliable. I think in Africa, especially, there is just so much more opportunity because um, we don't necessarily have the same power in tech that exists in the Western world. Even if you look at where AI models are being built, like who are the decision makers, the power shifts to the quote unquote global north. And so, as someone working at the intersection of tech and social impact, and also as someone who is African and who's working on the continent, I do see a lot of opportunity for there to just be more representation um, and have more Africans participate in that conversation of how tech can impact travel on the continent.
Thank you. I feel like this is just, for me, it's an area of so much unknown, but I think it's so great to continue to have conversations with people that are, learning and growing in the area and uncovering the strengths and the weaknesses so that we can, I don't know, it feels like unlike a lot of places, a lot of things that have developed, this is developing in a space and time where perhaps it won't need to have the same imbalances, because hopefully we're creating conversations that are timely enough that keep up with development. I hope. I don't know. I guess we'll see where it goes, but um I love that you kind of mentioned, you know, what you're already seeing and where gaps are, and that we can hopefully address gaps in a more rapid way. Well, Tammy, before we end our conversation, I would love for you to just, if there's anything else you wanted to share with our listeners, as well as where they can learn more about traveling with you. And then I have a few rapid fire questions to end our conversation.
Okay. So to travel with us on our group trips, they can go to our website, www.girlstrip.tours. We are also now offering solo trips, and that's also available on the website. And literally anyone can book through our platform. The idea is really to support local women, and anyone globally can do that. And then the metaverse travel is actually something I'm starting in corporate first, but if anyone is interested about that, um, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I think those are the main things I want to plug right now.
Okay, thank you so much. And I would just encourage people in the industry, if you hadn't already come across Tammy, to follow her, because I have just really been so inspired and learned so much just by seeing what you're exploring and talking about. And I really appreciate the innovation that I feel like you're bringing to the industry, and especially with shared passions of how tourism can support gender equity, and you know, and creating spaces for stories and connections and places for women. I am continually really admiring your work. So um, to end, we'll just go through our last few questions. So the first is, what are you reading right now?
I am reading The Old Drift, which is a fictional story set in Zambia. And because we are going to Zambia in August, yeah, I just wanted to read a book about the place.
Mhm. What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
A charger. Like, yeah, I don't mean a charger. I mean like the battery pack. I don't know what
Yeah,
to call it right now.
yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know what
that.
that's called either, but I understand where you're at. I was just in the middle of nowhere in Alaska actually, and it was a saving grace to have a little extra power when needed.
Yeah.
To
Power
Sojourn,
bank. That's what it's called.
what's that?
Power bank. That's what it's
Power
called.
bank. We're not getting any power bank sponsorships right now. You can. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you've lived there for a short while. Where is a place that you would still love to sojourn?
So somewhere I haven't been to.
Yeah.
Um, I really want to go to Dakar, Senegal.
Mm.
It's top of my list.
What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place that you've been?
Oh, that's a hard one. Um, Gelato. I
um,
would say it makes me think of, yeah, summers in Italy.
yeah. Who was the person that inspired or encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
Really, my mom. We grew up traveling quite frequently, like a few times a year, always international, either because we were living in New York at the time, always going to Africa or Europe for the summer. She sent us to Swiss summer camps. Like she gave us the world in the best way that she could. And yes, I really thank her for inspiring my wanderlust.
Thank you. If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
An adventure. I'm trying
Or
to
a
think of
travel?
maybe Oprah. That could be fun.
Yes.
Travel on Oprah's private jet and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can imagine the interesting, yeah, projects and things that you would learn just through being able to move through places with her, and the doors that she could open would be
Mhm.
really interesting. Who is one woman in the travel industry you admire and would love to recognize here in this space on the Soul of Travel podcast?
Ah, it's a tough one. There's so many. I really admire Jessica Nabongo, first Black woman to visit every country in the world. So I'll just shout her out.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would love to be able to talk with her someday on the podcast because I would love to hear what it was like, her experience was like moving through every country on the world. That seems, one, just impossible in general, but two, I would love to hear hear how that went for her. So thank you for acknowledging her in this space, and thank you so much for joining me on the podcast and sharing your story. And I'm just so excited to see what you continue to innovate and grow in the future. And I hope that my listeners are also excited to learn from you and learn more as well.
Thank you so much.